As you know, today we are talking about hate as a spiritual disease. And as Robert said, I have to warn you that my message today may be a little harder to hear than normal, but it is ultimately hopeful. Before I get there, though, I do have to begin by telling you a truth. And the truth is that there is a spiritual cancer that has been growing in our world for many years now. And like most cancers, it started small. It started with a simple mutation in our mind that made us want to put ourselves above others. That was stage one. And because we left our condition unchecked and untreated, the cancer spread. What began as an elevation of the self grew into cruelty towards others. That was stage two. And then it spread even more. We took our cruelty and we began to project it onto others so that we saw our own hate glaring back at us, provoking us into further hate. That was stage three. And even then, we didn't take action. And so now we are really sick. Now the disease is in our bones because now we have violence. Now we have fear. Now we have breakdowns of order that are getting closer and closer and closer. And if you're paying attention, it's hard to see this as an overstatement of our condition. This is stage four. And as we know with cancer, there is no stage five. The spiritual disease that has been progressing in our world is hate. Hate is the cancer that has burrowed deep into our minds, and until and unless we dissolve the inner hostility that lives in all of us, we will continue to see it manifest in the outer hostility of violence and despair. I know we don't want to look at this. I know we want to see ourselves as good spiritual people, but it is there. The evidence of this is all around us. It's in our broken relationships, and it's in our increasingly broken world. And while we refuse to look, the symptoms of our disease continue to get worse and worse. Our anger and our resentments, our score keeping, our stonewalling, our vicious judgments, our seeking to control other people with constant criticism and correcting, our outrage at the events of the world. And the Course even says that the slightest twinge of annoyance is but a veil drawn over intense fury. If you've ever read James Baldwin's book, The Fire Next Time, very good book, you may know that the title comes from an old bluegrass song with the lyrics, God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. And what that means is that with Noah, God purged the world with water. But if humanity doesn't change, the next reckoning will come by fire. Baldwin wrote that book 62 years ago, and here we are, with the fires that he warned us about burning everywhere. That's why we need to look carefully and we need to look soberly at our hate, because the fire isn't out there. The fire is in us. I did promise you some good news, though, and the good news is that we were not created for this fire. Hatred is not our true nature. It is ultimately alien to who we are. It is something we learned, and so it is something we can unlearn. And that's what I want to spend the rest of our time talking about today, how we can see the spiritual disease of hate operating in our lives and how we can bring forth what the Course calls a gentler dream that precedes our individual and our collective awakening. Remember, we all get home in the end. That part will happen because that has been decided by God. How long it will take is the part that is decided by you. I will say again, and I say this all the time, but it's unfortunate that the Course is so often accused of spiritual bypassing. To say, as the Course does, that it's crucial you look upon your hatred and realize its full extent, as the Course does in chapter 13, is not avoiding the topic. To say, look as calmly as you can upon your hatred, which the Course does in chapter 12, is not avoiding the topic. In fact, those are just two of the 233 references to hate, hatred, and hating in the Complete and Annotated Edition of A Course in Miracles and the supplements. 233 references. And with so many, there are obviously a lot of ways we can cover this topic, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you through a process, one that begins by directly facing our hate and ends by letting it go. Now, to really do that, we have to face something that the Course says is absolutely central, and that is a major reason that we form special relationships is to create a haven of love in order to balance the hate that we feel in other relationships. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Course's teachings on special relationships. Special relationships are where we pick out a special person so that we can receive special love, so that we ourselves can feel more special. And we all form special relationships. I want to be very clear on that. But the Course's criticism of special relationships is not only about singling certain people out for our love. It's about using special relationships to create a bubble where the goal isn't to dissolve your ego, but to keep the people out who trigger it. The Course talks about this very specifically in chapter 16, and it's a section, super powerful section called Abandoning the Illusion of Love. And in that section, the Course says, quote, "The special love relationship is an attempt to limit the destructive effects of hate by finding a haven in the storm of guilt. It makes no attempt to rise above the storm into sunlight. On the contrary, it emphasizes guilt outside the haven by the attempt to build barricades against it and keep within them. The special love relationship is not perceived as of value in itself, but as a place of safety from which hatred is split off and kept apart." And isn't this what we do with our preferred friends and our preferred partners? Don't we try and build a little haven with them where we can just shut out the rest of the world? I don't know about you, but Robert and I really relate to this idea. We're holed up here in the middle of the English countryside, just us and his kids. And the truth is, we kind of like the isolation. It actually feels like a haven, and we call it that. That's the thing we're supposed to aspire to in this world, isn't it? This pocket of love that is just ours. It's why we want our beautiful home. It's why we want the nice cars and the vacation rentals. We think we want the haven, but get this, the Course says we actually want the wall. We want the barricades around our place of safety where hatred can be split off and kept apart. Think about all of those people who are outside of your haven of special love right now. All of those difficult family members, those ex-lovers, those former friends who you feel have betrayed you, those old bosses, those strangers who are undesirable to you in some way. What the Course is trying to do is to get us to see that the walls around our haven are actually made of judgment. They are used to say, this is mine, and you can't enter. And what is that but hate? And worse, as we all learn eventually, even our safe havens aren't truly safe. The person you married, those friends you've curated, how long does it take before they make you angry? And then all those same old symptoms start flaring right up again. Same old anger, same old resentment, same old scorekeeping, same old criticism and judgments. And now our hate isn't outside our haven. Now it's right next to us in the bedroom. In the Abandoning the Illusion of Love section, the course goes on to talk about how the havens we build for our special love do actually have love in them, but it's not real love, because if it were, the hate couldn't get in. And that's why the section is called Abandoning the Illusion of Love, because as both our ego and their ego starts to creep into the haven, we become disillusioned. And the section says where disillusionment is possible, there was not love but hate. So in other words, our havens are an illusion of love if they're conditional on whether other people keep us safe and happy. Because when they inevitably fail to do that, then guess what? Our anger and our judgment step in. And that's when it becomes obvious that sitting underneath what we call love is what the Course calls hate, and a thick layer of it too. And that layer of hate is just sitting there like a fault line. Why? Because we never got rid of it. We just built a nice house on top of it. This is so important for us to understand, because from inside our havens and inside our special love, it's easy to think that we don't have hate in our lives. Or to the extent that we're willing to admit we do, it's easy to think that we only have tiny little pockets of hate, tiny little pockets that we feel for certain people or certain political figures in our lives, but it's nothing too big, nothing to be concerned about. And even in those moments when we feel the hate in us rise to the surface, we don't really look at it. We feel it. We feel it in that charge of anger, but we tell ourselves that that anger is there because other people have treated us badly. It's their fault. They're the ones to blame. They hurt us first. But the Course says that's not true either. In fact, the Course talks about an ancient hate in us that predates this life and anything that happened to us here. The Course even uses that phrase, or some form of that phrase, ancient hate, 7 times. Think about that. We brought an ancient hate with us into this life. It goes all the way back to the separation. And in fact, the Course calls the separation, quote, the time of terror and of ancient hate, which means the hate in us was not caused by the people who treated us poorly. Their treatment of us was an excuse for that pre-existing hate to come out. In chapter 30 of the text, the Course says, quote, look once again upon your enemy, the one you chose to hate instead of love. For thus was hatred born into the world, and thus the rule of fear established here. So note that hatred was born first by seeing an enemy in the world, and then the rule of fear was established here. That idea is so important to understand, because we like to think, and we talk about this all the time here, we like to think that we only hate or attack because we're afraid. But again, the Course says, no, we do not attack because we're afraid. We're afraid because we attack. In chapter 31 of the text, the Course says, and this is a direct quote, hate must father fear. If this is hard to hear, and it may be, if this is hard to hear because something inside you is afraid of that ancient hate, or it makes you feel poorly about yourself, remember that on some level, this is already happening. We're already feeling bad. Our unacknowledged hate is already causing us to dislike ourselves, to be disappointed in ourselves, to feel guilty. And without looking, the only thing that happens is we continue to feel bad, but we just don't know why. I saw the perfect example of what I'm talking about in a video the other day from that old sitcom 30 Rock. I don't know if any of you used to watch it, but in that sitcom, the main character, Liz Lemon, is going back home for her high school reunion. And the setup is that she's going home to prove to all the rich and pretty girls who bullied her that she had made it and she had become successful. But the twist is that she shows up at the reunion, and those pretty rich girls from back in the day, they call her the bully. And one of them says that they've been in therapy for years because of it. And it wasn't just the popular girls either. There's a guy that comes up to Liz at the reunion saying that she made his life hell in high school by the way that she treated him. And the episode is really interesting because it shows that, yeah, she was rejected. People didn't like her, but not because she was the innocent nerd, which is what she'd been telling herself for all those years. They didn't like her because while she saw herself as the victim, she was, in fact, the bully all along. And I just want to be clear about this. Before you, if you're thinking it, I am the daughter and I am the sister of domestic abuse survivors. I know there are times when people are cruelly assaulted for no reason. I am not talking about abuse here. The point I'm trying to make is that we simply have to face our ego squarely and calmly and be honest about the fact that it is more alive in us and more vicious in us than we want to admit. And until we do admit it, we are just going to keep defending our ego by finding ever new creative ways to make it more tolerable to us. And it is just going to keep causing us pain. And that is why the Course wants us to get in touch with the cost of our hate. We are never going to be truly motivated to let it go until we finally see that the cost of keeping our hate is simply more than we want to pay. Yesterday, because I was working on this sermon, Robert and I had this line from chapter 26 as our practice line for the day. It says, "Would I trade them," meaning God and Christ, "for an ancient hate?" And it was a really powerful reminder all throughout the day that if I keep hate for someone in my mind, I'm actually giving up God and I'm giving up Christ. Is the hate worth that? Is the hate worth dying for? Because under Miracle Principle 42, the Course says, quote, "Death is a human affirmation of the belief in hate." Is hate worth the price of our spiritual development? The very reason why we're here. Chapter 11 of the Course says, quote, "If you hate part of your soul," meaning if you hate your brother, "all your understanding is lost." Is the hate worth obliterating your function? Because the Manual for Teachers says, quote, "Harmfulness completely obliterates your function from your awareness. It'll make you confused, fearful, angry, and suspicious, and it will make the Holy Spirit's lessons impossible to learn." Is keeping the hate worth throwing away your salvation? Chapter 12 says, "You think you want to get rid of your brother and keep the hatred. Yet if your brother is your salvation, what can this mean except you prefer attack to salvation?" I could keep going with even more quotes on how hate obscures your love, on how hate hides you from the love that you want, how hate causes you guilt, how hate makes love meaningless to you, how hate makes you lose touch with your true identity as God created you, and worse. Given all of this, do you want this spiritual cancer in your mind? Assuming the answer is no, then let's talk about how you can get rid of it. Because so far, we've seen the need to look at the ways in which we attempt to build havens with people we love, to shut out people we don't. We've looked briefly at the high cost of keeping all of that hate in our lives. So now the question becomes, how do we get rid of it? And fortunately, the Course has many truly magnificent images of our hate being transformed to love. What we see as an impossible task, the Course sees as an inevitable one. And that should give us a lot of hope that we really can do this. There's a passage in chapter 27 near the end of the text that I'd like to read to you. This one is a few sentences, but understanding what he's saying here is really key to understanding how we can get out of this trap of hate. So I've changed the passage from third person to second person so it's more relatable, but here's what the Course says. It says, "So fearful is the dream, the world that we're living in now, so seeming real, that you could not waken to reality unless a gentler dream preceded your awakening and allowed your calmer mind to welcome, not to fear, the voice that called with love to awaken you. A gentler dream in which your suffering was healed and where your brother was your friend. God willed you waken gently with joy and gave you means to waken without fear." So in other words, our mind has made this world of hate. Our mind has made this world of war and fear, and we feel very stuck in it. And we feel very at the effect of it. And to free ourselves, we need to listen to the Holy Spirit's voice that is calling us with love to see that in our true nature, we are already healed, and to see our brothers and our sisters as our friend versus our enemy. And when we can do that, the Course says we will usher into our mind and into our world the gentler dream that precedes our awakening. The Course paints a whole beautiful picture of that gentler dream. And it leads to what the Course calls the resurrected world that I spoke about in this year's Easter sermon. If you missed that, you can find it on YouTube. It's a video called The Resurrection of the World, the collective awakening in A Course in Miracles, if you want to go deeper into that idea. But the main thing for us to understand now is that we are meant to replace our world of hate with a gentler dream. And our part in ushering in that gentler dream is to see each other as friends versus enemies. And that makes sense, doesn't it? A mind full of enemies makes a world of hate. So if we want a world of love, we have to start loving, which means we have to actively start resisting within us that temptation to hate. Lesson 161 of the workbook calls us to, quote, take a stand against our anger, which means that no level of hate is acceptable. Can you imagine? No level of hate being acceptable in your mind. If you were trying to quit an addiction that you just know is ruining your life, you'd quit it entirely. If you were trying to stop drinking, for example, you wouldn't say, I'm going to have a drink here and there. You would be determined not to have a drink ever. And that's how we can take a stand against our hate. We can say, I don't want this cancer in my mind ever. And it's also how we can take a stand for love. So just as we can take a stand against hate, we can use our mind to take a stand for love. And the way we do that is we are determined to forgive. There's even a workbook lesson. I am determined to see. We can be determined, as the Course says, to see the kindness in others versus counting up all the hurts that they've given us. We can commit to seeing the invisible divine reality in absolutely everyone. We can do more to invite people into our love versus shutting them out with our hate. And isn't this what A Course in Miracles is all about? The Course even calls itself a course in love. So at the beginning of my message today, I mentioned James Baldwin's book, The Fire Next Time. And in that book, Baldwin wrote, if we do not now dare everything. The fulfillment of the prophecy of the fire next time is upon us. And I think the same thing is true for us right now. If we do not dare everything, the spiritual disease of hate will continue to be upon us, and it will only continue to grow worse. One of the most important lines in the entire course, in my opinion, on this topic is in lesson 246 of the workbook. And that lesson opens with, let me not think that I can find the way to God if I have hatred in my heart. Let me not think that I can find the way to God if I have hatred in my heart. You know, this actually is a little, now that I'm thinking about it, this is a mirror to that other lesson in the course that we talked about so much in our forgiveness challenge, where it says the way to God is through forgiveness here. And then it doubles down and says there is no other way. He's so serious that we have to get rid of the hatred in our heart. And so as we close, I would encourage you to reflect deeply upon where is the hatred in your heart. Reflect on where you have been nursing those old grudges. Where have you been keeping that story alive about how wronged you were? Where have you grown numb to all the pain in the world? Where have you built up the walls in order to keep other people out? We cannot wait for the world to get better before we offer our love. We must offer our love to make the world better. In other words, we must dare everything right now, especially now, because this is how we get home.